You are listening to the It's Your Time podcast, and I'm your host, certified life coach Michelle Arnold Burke. In today's episode, I'm discussing authentic networking with leadership expert Steph Auping. Welcome to the It's Your Time podcast, the podcast where busy professionals like you get the practical solutions and support you need to gain control of your schedule so you can strive to be the best in your career, but without the stress and overwhelm. If you're looking to increase your energy and decrease your stress, you are in the right place. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the podcast, friends. Okay, here we are into January, and January is National Mentoring Month. So I thought it would be a blast to bring on an expert to talk to us about networking. So today I am thrilled to share a recent conversation that I had with Steph Auping, who is an incredible leadership expert, facilitator, relationship builder, and coach. And I met Steph at the Women in Leadership Conference last year. Well, actually, gosh, now for 2025, technically 2023. And she was the facilitator for our group. It was such an amazing experience. And I highly recommend, if anyone is interested, to check that out. You can just Google search online. Anyways, for this conversation, I want to share with you, it was just so much fun because Steph's passion really does shine through in her ideas and her knowledge and all that she shares around the importance of networking and relationship building. And I love that she was able to share real life examples to bring all of her insights to life. We wanted to really make sure that everything she offered came from a place of authenticity so that you walk away with practical, actionable tips, from understanding how men and women approach networking differently to using it as a tool for mentoring and career growth. This episode, the wisdom specifically that she shared, is packed with value. So, without further ado, let's dive in.
Okay, this is going to be so much fun. Now, you and I met last year at the Women in Leadership Conference, and then we remained connected. And this year, I hunted you down in the most loving way, of course, and I found you. So, I guess before we get started, can you introduce yourself in a way that you most enjoy?
Of course. And I'm so glad you hunted me down. I quite enjoyed that myself. So, my name is Steph Auping, and I have my own leadership development organization. It is called Level Up Leadership. And I like to introduce myself by talking about what problem I solve. So, I help leaders. I help leaders who are good at their jobs, but I also help leaders who are a bit frustrated, which tends to be a lot of them, and want to lead better. So, I give them the tools that they need to do so, but I also help create the environment where they can learn from others. So I believe super strongly in the power of peer learning, which absolutely goes to the heart of what I believe you and I are going to talk about today, and that's connection.
Yeah, you've said in the past that that was your why connection. So, can you maybe speak a little bit about that and why you believe that both are such vital components to effective leadership? I hear you. I do think there's probably a lot of frustration. So, I guess what about the networking and connection do you think is so important?
And it's funny because a slight aside, it's funny because I've taught about finding your why, and we talk about purpose and really living your purpose and walking in your purpose and leading with your purpose. And for a long time, I've thought, what is my purpose? And it's so funny because I think it boils down to really, I think it boils down to what do people come to you for? How do people see you? How do you see yourself? I think I overcomplicated. And really, when it boiled down to is I think it's connection. I think it's just as simple as that. And I overcomplicated it. So it really is about creating connection, making connections. I think I make connections to the learning that I do. But a lot of it is brokering connections. So wanting people feel connected with me, but I think it's brokering connections with others. And so when you say, why do I think connection is so important today, and even more critical, I think today than ever, for a couple reasons. I think it's always been important when I say it's not what you know, but who you know. I think that's been true, and I think it's even more true today. So I'm not making this number up, but I know this feels more, maybe overstated, but I've seen somewhere between 70 to 85% of jobs are gotten because you knew someone.
Mm,
And so it really is. It's who you know. And so not only that, but people want to be connected to people who know other people. And in some cases, we even talk about a super connector. And I know people have actually called me a super connector. And
mm.
I think before I said, oh, I'm not sure I am, but you know what? I'll take it. I'll wear it as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Like I'm the person, and I know this isn't a PC, maybe a way of saying it, but like the person, like I got a guy, I know a
Yeah.
guy. Uh, I do. I know people, and I'm so happy to connect other people. So that's one, right? You we want to know people who know other people and make
Mm,
those connections because it matters, and that's how we get jobs. It's how we get introduced to others for the work that we want to do today, do better work, get better work, etc. I think it's important for a second reason, and that is we live in an echo chamber today. So, in the age of information, we're actually more isolated than ever in terms of information that we have access to. And again, that sounds so funny because we have access to so much information. But
mhm.
because of the algorithms today, we get information kind of echoed back at us. And so it's hard to get out of our own echo chambers and who we know, and knowing a more diverse group of people helps us break out of that. Actually, we teach this concept in a program that we teach called the proximity principle. And it says that we typically network with those around us in kind of 40 feet. I know today's hybrid environment, virtual environment, that seems a little odd, but you can almost think like virtually 40 feet, right? Like the people that
Yep.
you have virtual meetings with. Um, it's the 47 4 principle. So within kind of 40-ish feet, even virtual feet, 7 people, you kind of talk to or go to the same 7 people, and you tend to have about 4 things in common with them. So that might be geography, that might be language, that might be socioeconomic status, that might be race, that might be gender, that might be age. So you typically have about 4 things in common with people that you network with. So again, it's like networks of convenience. You just tend to spend time with people that you have stuff in common with. So again, we live in these echo chambers. So getting out and having connections with others just helps us get out of that kind of those networks of convenience. And so how do we find and make connections? And the last one is just really obvious based on all the things that I've talked about, and probably what everyone listening to this podcast today feels at some point, and that is we're just lonely.
Mm.
Um, it has increased since the pandemic in this age of virtual and hybrid work. We're just lonely. And the data says that 1 in 3 Americans report feeling lonely at least once a week. 10% of Americans said that they feel lonely every day. And that jumps to 30% of Americans said that they feel lonely every day if they're between the ages of 18 to 34. Let me say that again.
Wow.
30% of people between the ages of 18 to 34 say that they feel lonely every day. Um, we need connectedness. We need connectedness. And again, I went on and on. I promise
No,
all my
no, no, I
answers
think
won't be
that's
that
all
long.
yeah, it's all so important. It's so funny when you started talking about the network and the numbers, my brain went to Kevin Bacon. It's kind of like that, right? 7 degrees?
It is.
A little bit
Yes,
like
it
that.
really is. It really is. And so we need to be more connected. I mean, we need more of those connections. And so how are we reaching out to do that? And I think again, in the age where it should be easier, it's actually gotten a bit harder.
Yeah, I love what you talk about with the algorithm because I think sometimes people think they're out there and there's so much out there, but you're right. It's not us necessarily choosing who it is that we're connecting with. Another thing that you mentioned, and I think is so important, and I had a mentor tell me this a while ago, it's not only who you know, but who knows you. So if you're not kind of going out and doing the work for those job opportunities when they come up, but I think, and I'd love your take on this, that there's also, I know for me, especially when I was younger, now I feel like, okay, yeah, I love to quote unquote network, but I think it's because I've shifted my mindset to what you're talking about. Connect with people. How can I help you? Do I know somebody else that could help you if I can't help you? And I think there's a difference between maybe men and women or older, younger? Like, what is your take on how different folks feel comfortable, I guess, with the idea of networking?
Yeah, so I think, well, I think there's some people that just get it. I'm thinking about just my son. This is kind of a funny story. He came home, he got a job at a golf course, and he came home. This is a 16-year-old kid that came home and he was like, "Hey, I know the top 10 members by name." And I was like, "Okay, what's your point?" And he was like, "Mom, because you got to know the top 10 members." And I'm like, "Again, for what purpose?" And he was like, "Because you got to be connected so that, and like somehow he just got it. And I don't know where he picked it up from. And maybe, maybe it was mom, maybe it was
I'm
dad.
like,
I don't know
wait
where
a
he got it.
second. Isn't that what you love to do? Maybe he got it from you.
Maybe. So it could have been, nature, nurture, So, and some people just get it, right? And again, where they got it from. And some people just do it naturally well. But I think there's some misnomer around, then some people just get it and then some people never get it. And if you can't do it, then you just don't do it. And I don't think that's true. I think you absolutely can learn it. It's a learned skill. You don't have to be an extrovert. This is not like the and I'm forgive me, you car salesman. I know that's a terrible way to say it, but right, like it's not it's not like the walking around a party and handing out the business cards. That's
Yes.
not what we're talking about networking. We're really talking about how do you make a connection? How can you introduce people to someone who has similar interests, who maybe could use that thing in the work that they're doing? And so it's not schmoozing. That's really not what we're talking about. And I'll introduce a term. A super connector is, I'll use myself as that example, right? I really do make connections, and I'm going to get to your question about men and women because it's a what I do is more similar to the way that men tend to network,
Mm,
even though I'm a woman. Uh, it's more surface level connections, and what do I mean by that? Super connectors tend to know a lot of people and not a lot about them. And I don't mean that in a rude way.
hmm
People listening that know me would be like, "Oh, she's shallow." I don't mean that. I just mean like, I'm not afraid to like, if I knew you, Michelle, and I know a little bit about you, or I know this thing about you, I would not be afraid to connect you to someone and say, like, I think they're doing this similar work. I should introduce you to.
mm.
And maybe you've got something in common, maybe you've got something to connect on, and I wouldn't be like if you came back to me and said like, "I don't think so." I would be like, "Oh, okay, well, maybe not." But you probably still maybe had an interesting conversation. What tends to happen with women and others who just don't enjoy that is they overthink it. They maybe even over invest in the introduction. And here's what I mean by that. A introduction for me sounds something like this. A quick LinkedIn maybe introduction where I connect the two of you. It's two sentences. I'll leave you to take it from here. Or it's a quick email to the two of you saying, "Hey, here's why I'm introducing you. I leave it to take it from here." What tends to happen is people spend way too much time like over engineering, really writing like a long email, or maybe even calling both of you to do the whole like priming the like this, I'm going to introduce you to Michelle and here's why.
Yeah.
And you over invest in all of that time, and then it becomes exhausting. And it doesn't need to be that. It can be much simpler so that it becomes much easier and you can do more of it if you're not kind of going too deep, if that makes sense. Does
Yeah.
that make sense,
Yeah,
Michelle? How do you
100%.
feel about it?
I
Could you
love.
do the same?
Yeah, I love this. Yes, but I think it was a huge mindset shift for me because I think when I thought when, coaches or people would say you have to network more and, whatever for your career, I heard I have to like sell myself. And that's not what you're saying at all. You're talking about being like a servant or a helper to other people to connect them. And for sure, obviously are then also connected through all of these connections, but it doesn't sound like you're coming from the standpoint of you're out for your own benefit. It's that you are looking to help others connect. And in the process, who knows, down the road, then they'll be like, oh, hey, I know Steph and she can help you with XYZ. Am I hearing that back right?
100%. And I'm going to use this word because I think I mean it in a positive sense. You're, I'm going to say two different ways. You're network is your net worth. And I really do mean
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
You are building social capital when you do that. And I mean that in a rich way. Like you are building, like I said, people want to be connected to people who have that rich, group of people that could be connections. And not everybody needs to do this, right? In the way that I'm describing it, but you need to do it in some way. You need connections in some way because you never know when you need that next job or an introduction to someone, or you need, just imagine tomorrow you're doing some research and you need someone who knows something about something and you're reaching out to find that out, or you need to know someone in a different industry, or you need a new client, or you need, right? And so you're just thinking more broadly, and you're going to need people for something. There's not, even if you're not in sales, even if you're not looking for a new job, even if you're not starting a new company, and so you're going to need those connections. And so how do you start to build that up, and how do you start to build some of that social capital so that when you do have to reach out, it doesn't feel like cold outreaches?
Yeah, and I think if you just go with true curiosity, like when I'm trying to mentor people, I'm like, you're just being a human being. Like, just have true curiosity of how it is that maybe you could help them down the road. And it takes off that, like you said, overthinking, having all the extra stress and overwhelm. Like, if you're just truly curious and then you move on and you help the next person, then it's just, when I listen to you talk, it sounds so light. It sounds so easy. It doesn't have to be this like chore that you're doing.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you feel when you're able to give, Michelle? Give me a couple words. When you
Oh
can
my gosh,
give some.
I love it. Like so give and care. Like care is a huge word that can sometimes be beneficial for me, but can also sometimes be an area that I need to get coached on. But I feel like, yes, I'm caring if I can help you and give you something. So I love that. Yeah, I think that's a super important point.
And so I often say, when you are not reaching out, you're denying others the opportunity to care for you.
Mm.
And I think it is that mindset shift. Like, we often feel bad, like reaching out to people, but first of all, if you really are just reaching out to network, people love to talk about themselves, love to talk about themselves. So if you're giving them the opportunity to talk about themselves, again, don't waste people's time, but they really do love the opportunity to talk about themselves, especially at some point if you can reciprocate by introducing them to someone of value. And they love to give. And so if there's an opportunity for them to give you something, or again, at some point you can give them something, I think that's the way to think about it.
Yes. Now, can you maybe even share, so you just asked me a question, I'm gonna ask you back, like a personal story, maybe, or an example of how that strong connections, networking have kind of brought you to where you're at. And I know you talked about purpose when we started, and I love that. And I hope everyone heard you, because I think, especially as we start the new year, oftentimes people are like, I got to find my purpose. Like, it's out there somewhere and it's just going to like magically fall on them. But to your point, like, no, just trust what seems to be kind of your jam as you're living your life every day.
Well, I know before we talked about this, you had said, so I'm doing something so out of character, where I'm a little out of my depth. I am starting a emporium. Um, it is a boutique slash community space to just create connection. And I know I want to talk about that, but I actually, I have such a good story that I feel like I gotta tell this other story,
Okay, okay.
because it goes back to Will, and how I ended up at Will. So this was my fourth time going to this women in leadership conference. And again, this is just such a good example of why you stay in touch with people and how you stay in touch with them. And again, this is like such a, so again, hopefully your listeners can kind of stay with this like web we weave. And again,
Yes.
part of that is us ending up on this podcast. So I ended up getting involved with Linkage, the company that sponsors, Will, because Kristen Howe and Jen McCullum are former colleagues of mine. Both ended up at Linkage, the chief product officer, and Jen McCullum, who's the former CEO of Linkage. They brought me on to Will. I show up at Will and I bring a former colleague of mine who I used to work with. And a woman that I met in Spain doing some work, and I brought the two of them to Will. And I brought a woman who worked during the pandemic, Nicole Smith. I met her because I reached out to her on LinkedIn and I just thought she was fab. I saw her post and I thought she was fantastic. So I reached out to her. She does work in EQ and I thought, I just want to meet her. We had an amazing phone call. We now currently work together. I brought her to Linkage.
Wow.
She's fantastic. She knows Dr. Precious and Stephanie Kirkland, Dr. Stephanie
Yeah.
Kirkland. She has brought them to Will. Um, and so again, I know some of your listeners maybe have attended
Wow.
Will. And again,
Uh-huh.
so some of these names are characters that, so it is like my tangled web we weave in terms of this is all kind of started with me bringing these folks in. Again, I could tell even more stories about how all of these kind of tentacles are out there, but it's all of these like interesting. You reach out, you ask people to do things, you bring people together, they bring more people in, they bring more people in. um, I really could probably say probably 20 people are in that room of facilitators because I was asked to join Will.
Wow. Isn't that amazing? Like, and I
And
hope,
again, we are on this call because
yeah,
I was joined, asked to join Wealth.
maybe I'll come and try to join you in the next will or two.
Yes, please. Yes,
That
please.
is, I love that because I think also if I'm going down like another layer to what I'm hearing you say, is, and we love promoting women in leadership positions. And I think so often women, and this is a generalization, but tend to, and I've been guilty myself, like you want to wait until you have all the boxes checked and everything has to feel perfect about getting that next promotion or job. But it could be so much easier if we just are willing to have that connection. And then maybe it takes off an extra layer of, um, I don't know, like fear, right? Like if you're going into these new jobs and promotions, when you say, hey, Steph, what do you think about this job? Like you can give me kind of the belief that maybe I need if I don't quite have it yet, as far as making that next leap.
Well, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I've been guilty of it myself. I've done the same. I can guarantee there's jobs. I mean, I can think of specific examples of jobs that I didn't go after because I didn't think I could check all the box. And we've heard, or if you haven't heard, it's not the case with men. They sort of, if they meet 70 to 80% of the qualifications, they go after it. And I'm not making this up. This is
Right.
actually supported by the data that they often will go after a position if they feel that they are, you know, adequate adequately qualified versus we feel like we have to be almost overqualified to go after the position. But I'm gonna steal from our Carla Harris, who we've heard often, and it goes back to the being connected. She talks often about who is championing you in the room, like who knows your name, because you're not able to promote yourself. You're not able to talk about the things that you've done in the rooms where those decisions are made. So, whether it be you interviewing for a job or where they're talking about promotions, or even if it's not a promotion, even if it's talking about who gets put on the next project, you're not in the room. And so, if people don't know who you are and how qualified you are and what amazing work you're doing, people have to know who you are. And that comes through you doing the work and making sure that people know what you're doing. And again, that sounds weird because it sounds like then you're out there doing self promotion. And in some ways you are, but it has to do with basically you have to make sure that people know the good work that you're doing. And that doesn't have to be super overt, but it also can't be so covert that people don't know what it is that you've accomplished.
Yeah, and I feel like if we're willing to take that foundational step, then it could make every step after that just a little bit easier. And I think also, and Carla talks, I love Carla, and she talks about the importance of being authentic too. Do you think that you are there, not do you think, I'm sure you do. Do you have some practical steps that you use with your leadership, like teaching, that helps to foster like that authenticity, like lasting relationships for people to have with their teams?
Eh, Be you, yeah. Trying to be someone else, trying to be the super connector if you're not the super connector. Again, networking is a learned behavior. You absolutely can do it. but do it as you. Don't do it as, what you think a super connector might look or sound like. Absolutely go in it and be authentically you. I don't think it is a quantity game. I do think it's a quality game. And so
Mm,
I actually would say, and that maybe sounds counter to what I have said before. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to know everything about someone. That's not what I mean by quality. But I do actually think it does mean, so when I said earlier I might not know a lot about you, what I don't mean is that I didn't listen to you. That's not what I mean. It means
mm,
that we may have spent a few minutes together, but I listened really hard to what you're saying. So in the 10 minutes that we spent together, I may have heard you say these two things so that when someone else says something to me, I'm like, Michelle said that to me. Like, that's the
mm.
work she's doing. And then I'm going to make that connection. And so I think the listening part, the being genuine about being present, and I think that's a lot of what's missing today, right? And we've got
Mhm.
so many distractions, whether that be our phones or our emails or just the fact that we're busy. So I think being present when we are talking with people, I think we miss opportunities, frankly. I think we miss a ton of opportunities because we're just so distracted. I mean, let me use a silly example. Get in an elevator with people these days. They're not paying attention to who they're in the
Oh,
elevator with.
no, in fact, if I can just give you since you use that, this happened a couple years ago. My sister and I stepped into the elevator. We were both on our phones. I just assumed she hit the button. I guess she must have assumed that I hit the button. And we're sitting there, and a guy walks in. He goes, "You two going anywhere?" Oh, yeah. I guess we should hit one of these buttons.
So, but imagine that guy was your boss's boss.
Right.
Uh, right? And an opportunity for you to potentially say something about a project that you're working on. And again, it's that moment of somewhat promotion. Or imagine it's your boss's boss and it's an opportunity to say something about someone on your team who just did something really amazing.
Yeah.
Um, it's those moments that I think we're missing. And I think and again, that's where I say it's being authentically you. I think it's and I think it's I'm going to say that a competitive advantage where you can still authentically be you, but you can make those moments happen by being present, by being by looking for the opportunities that others aren't looking for. And they're simple. They really are simple. Let me give you another example of one that I heard that I think is really powerful. I had a chief technology officer that was in one of my programs not long ago. Well, it's been a couple years ago, but it was just after the pandemic, I guess. And he was telling me that he was asked to go to a lot of conferences. And his big aha from a big program that we did, but we were talking about networking as one of the things. And he said his big aha from a lot of other things, like strategy and other things that we were talking about, his big aha was part of the networking piece. And he says he goes to all these conferences and he's asked to speak. He's kind of at that point in his career. He says he does like most executives or speakers, he goes, or headliner, he goes in, he speaks, and then he goes out. And he said, I never really thought about what I could get from the room. He always thought about what he could give to the room. And he goes, I am in the room with people who are super smart and in some cases even smarter than the topic that I'm speaking on or have such different perspectives. And so his big aha, and he's, since reached out to me and actually super active now on LinkedIn, is he's like, I just go in early. Like I grab a cup of coffee and stay in the back of the room. I stay for lunch. And it's just been a game changer for him. So again, that's such an opportunity that existed that he just wasn't leveraging or using. And so again, it doesn't have to be hard stuff. It's just even looking at your current, how are you living your life today? And there are opportunities that exist today that you're just not leveraging.
Oh, I love that. I do. I was listening to a podcast today where they were even talking about the difference between using the word goal and intention. So I feel like if you even just say like, what is your intention as you go into this, it can again be not so much about selling myself or making it all about me. It can be, which is where I think some people kind of stumble as far as thinking about networking. But what is it that they can do intentionally every day to get out there and help someone? And yeah, I do. I think for sure, like it will. I'm a big believer of karma. I feel like what you put out there is going to come back anyway. So if you do it with good energy and knowing, to your point, that there's not a right or wrong way, the way is what feels best and most true to you.
Here, 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 here. As a matter of fact, one of the things that came out of our conversation at this most recent will, and sorry, I know I'm going back to that a lot, but it
Yeah,
was
no,
just a
I
couple,
love it. Yeah,
less, a
yeah.
month ago, was this idea of reaching out to dormant ties and how easy and how authentic that is. So, people that you worked with at your previous jobs, people that you worked with at your previous department, people that you still work with, but you just don't run into as much as you used to. And just reaching out to them for either a real life lunch, coffee, or even a virtual, just a, hey, you got 15 minutes to catch up, haven't connected with you in forever. And gosh, if you could do one of those, a week, a month, again, that's so authentic. It's a super easy thing to do, and it's something you would so enjoy. And it is doing exactly what we're talking about. It is giving you that social capital. I can't imagine that you would come away from 50% of those conversations without something actually really rich in terms of the work that you're doing, the professional goals that you have, maybe even the personal goals that you have. I mean, you're going to get something from. I'm saying 50%. I venture it's way more than that.
Yes, and I think my first thought was people might say, I'm too busy for that. I don't have time for that. But I would like to just offer, especially when you're like 15 minutes, how much time it could probably give you back down the road if you're able to make these connections and then they can help you in new ways.
Also, a super quick story.
Okay.
When we started Leadership and Co, which is my former organization, which I just left somewhat recently, we started that organization when our former company, we worked for a company called Corporate Executive Board, CEB, which got acquired by Gartner. And they shut down the leadership academies, which is a job that I did for 10 years. And we didn't want it to end. So we formed our own company and did a similar program. Um, and so we thought, oh, we'll just go, back, and hopefully do that same work with similar clients. We had to build a network. And it's not that I was going back to all my similar clients, but I had to build a network all over again because I kept no network.
Mhm.
And I didn't feel like I had to. And so I really had to build from the ground up an entire network, which is so silly. And so again, to your point, I did nothing for 10 years and then had to start from scratch. And that makes
Mhm.
absolutely zero sense.
Oh, yeah, that's a good story for sure. Do you think, is there like one, if somebody's like, okay, I've listened, I'm going to take one small step to try this. Do you think you have anything that kind of is top of mind for you that could help somebody kind of dip their toes into this?
It's a really good question. So this is a little bit hard because it's something that I do regularly, but I think you could do it from a professional or personal. So, and again, personal networks and connections are personal networks and connections. They're also valuable for sure. So,
Yeah.
if I sort of use that, I often say, and we think about doing this all the time. It's just taking the step to do it. When you read something, see something, and you think, hey, I should send this to, or I bet someone would be interested in, actually take the step to do it and send it to them.
Mhm.
So every article I read, so I make it my mission now because it's like part of my DNA now. Um, but again, it's a learned behavior. So it's not like I did this like just like my son might. Um, if I read an article, I think who would like this? Who would benefit from this? And then I actually send that to them. If I see that someone's coming to town, I think to myself, who would want to see, who would be interested in that concert or that show? And I make sure that I send them a note and say, did you see such and such is coming to town? If I see a recipe, I know that sounds so silly, maybe not every recipe, but if I see something that's like really weird or unique, I will send them a note and say, have you seen this before? I redo furniture. I know that sounds random, but I will send something to someone that I know might be interested and say, have you seen this? So it's all of those things. It could be personal things, it could be professional things, but I'm just constantly thinking like, who would like this? And what it does is it makes me feel good. So it's a little like, it's not altruistic, right? Like it's not all about them. Some of it is like when I do it, I think like, oh, that feels good. And not all the time do I get a response back because people are busy.
Yep.
So, but oftentimes I do. And it's like, I didn't know that. That's amazing. Every now and again, I got like, I'll get a like, I didn't realize they were coming into town. Like, you want to go? And I'm like, now I got,
And
now I got a
buy
date.
your ticket.
Uh, so right, but it's like, or I read the article. What did you think about this? Right, and now I'm in an interesting conversation about something. Um, so again, it often has a residual benefit back to me, but it has that benefit to them, and I'm on their radar. They're thinking about me, and they often then send me something back that's interesting. And so, if I were to say, like, take a step, you're doing it anyway. Like I said, you're often
Yes.
thinking about that thing anyway. It's just taking that next step to actually send it to someone.
I love that. I love this whole conversation because I feel like you've just made it so simple, so easy, so just show up and be a human. Like it's not a huge undertaking that sometimes our brains want to make it. And to one of your earlier points, I think that's also, to be expected sometimes, right? Our brain wants to keep us comfortable, like that's normal. But it doesn't have to be that way. It can be so simple and yet so rewarding. Have we missed anything?
Thanks. And Michelle, I will say this. I know you do this really well too. So the two of us sitting here talking about it, like I know we both are like we both do this. I hope your listeners, for those that don't, like actually, like I think proof's in the pudding. I think if you do one of these things and you get like the positive reward for doing it, and then you get the positive reward and you do it a little bit more, and then you get the positive reward and you do a little bit more. Like I hope we've convinced them enough that they
Yes.
that they
Yes.
try it, that they try
Yes.
it.
I love it. And I think probably when when I used to be afraid of it, I'd be like, oh, I don't want to bother them. But I think that is not your message at all. Like you are so talking about how you can help others. Like I love that.
And you'll feel that. I think that is exactly what you will feel, is that you really do spend most of the time feeling like you are giving, not taking.
Love it. Where can people find you?
Oh, I love that. They can find me on LinkedIn. So if they look up Stephanie Auping, so Auping, and then I would love for them to email me. Are you looking for me to provide my email address? Is
I
that?
can also put it in the link, like however best
Oh,
people can connect with you.
yeah, that's fantastic. So yeah, let's put my email address in there, and then yeah, and then we'll connect on LinkedIn too. And I would love to connect. I really would. So that is a genuine. Please reach out to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
It has been a pleasure, and I look forward to connecting with you next time. I'm so glad you reached out to me and hunted me down at Will.
Yes.
Okay, wasn't that great? I love the tips that she suggested. And again, I want to reinforce the important thing is that you do networking in a way that works for you. Listen, thinking that there's a right way to do it and waiting around to figure out what that is just going to keep you stuck. Just start taking action. Start doing things that you enjoy. Start reaching out to folks that you think seem super interesting. I really do believe that when you are able to come from curiosity, I believe you're able to make such a difference, not only in your life, but in the lives of others. Because I do believe that when we also show up wanting to help others, it all falls into place. What we put out into the world, we get back. So be intentional. Okay, friends, that's what I have for you today. Let's meet back here next week. But for now, make it a great day. Take care.
Did you know you can take this work to a deeper level with me one-on-one? Go to michelleburtcoaching.com and click on Get Started to begin.